today. This will be a real short video, and we're going to finish this up and then move right along. We left off talking about campaign finance and how a lot of groups are finding ways around the limits on PAC contributions and individual contributions, and we included the last thing we mentioned was how Citizens United versus FEC and the ruling in that case led to the advent of super PACs. And this was just showing you a graphic, and I showed you the updated stuff from 2020, but this was an example of what was going on in 2016, where you get tens, if not hundreds of millions spent by super PACs supporting or trying to oppose a particular candidate or candidates. And super PACs, remember, they can spend unlimited amounts of money on political activity as long as they don't coordinate with a campaign or the candidate. Okay? And super PACs, along with 527s, they don't have to disclose their donors. We often refer to that as dark money. And these super PACs, this will show you to a degree here how it works out. You get donors, and you look at the top on the left, there are donors that give more than $1 million sometimes to a super PAC. And these large donations, which they don't have to be reported, they give a large quantity of money to these super PACs that you never know who's funding that super PAC or those commercials. Like if you look on the right, the super PACs, for example, Restore Our Future, who, that particular super PAC is dropping millions of dollars on various ads. And that was just in the first year that super PACs were permitted. And so what happens is these really wealthy people find ways they can insert more of their money into the system. All right. Now, something else that's really important about these super PACs too, and large spending. Do you really think, like for example, there are people who have given contributions of $5 to $10 million to a super PAC in one sitting? Okay. Do you think they would donate $5 to $10 million to a super PAC if they didn't think that it would be a wise investment? Okay. You don't typically get rich by making poor investment choices. And so these people understand that having the right people in government matters to them. All right. Now, the last section of our outline here is how much effect do interest groups really have on policy? Okay. And the answer is it's hard to quantify into a number. Okay. But let's say this first of all. The fact that there are restrictions and regulations by the federal government and the state government tell you that interest groups must have some kind of impact. All right. We would not be having this conversation if they didn't have some type of impact. And what you're going to look at tomorrow is a little video about how the NRA influences Congress, even though they don't really represent that large of a segment of Americans. Okay. So they have to be having some type of impact or they wouldn't put restrictions on them in the first place. Okay. Now, the criticisms of groups, there's three main ones we want to look at. Okay. One of them is that they have too much of an influence over government and it comes through money. Okay. If you're really cynical, and some of you are, you'll look at interest groups and be like, oh my gosh, there is too much influence from these particular groups because they have money, they have finances. We were talking about super PACs and what PACs contribute. And when you add all that up, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars to get people elected. All right. And if they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, trying to get somebody elected, then there's probably a reason for that. Not only that, we look at lobbying costs. That a group who may not be popular can hire a lobbyist to help influence members of Congress or other members of government to get their way. All right. Throw in too the idea that litigation, okay? Litigation using the court system, which is an expensive tactic, but it can be super helpful if if you win, all right? And look, some of the court cases we've talked about, you can agree with a decision or disagree with a decision, but the idea behind it is that if you have just a committed group of people who have access to a large sum of money, you can have a disproportionate amount of influence over the government and what 300 million people have to abide by in terms of the law. All right. So The level of influence is too great, and typically it's related to money. Okay. Second major criticism is that interest groups help lead to what we call gridlock. All right. Now, gridlock, remember, that's when laws aren't getting passed, when we can't compromise, where Democrats may want one thing, Republicans may want something else, and nobody agrees on anything. Okay. And interest groups help contribute to that because ultimately groups are all trying to get a certain matter of influence with the government, and there are so many competing groups that oftentimes members of Congress feel like they don't know who to listen to. What do you do when you have two groups of people, two opposing groups, and we'll just say environmentalists? What happens if you have scientists, a group of scientists who tell you that climate change is real and that we are contributing to it by burning fossil fuels and we need to change? But then you get another group of scientists who say, yeah, we don't know this for as a definitive truth. We think it may be true, but at the same time, if you put restrictions on oil, coal, and gas, you're going to put a lot of people out of work, and maybe it'll help in the long run, but you're hurting people in the short run, right? And this causes a lot of individuals to really have second thoughts about the decision making process they're involved in. Not only that, but groups oftentimes are pulling so much on members of Congress and members of government that they don't have time to actually go and do their job because they're trying to make these groups happy, right? So think of, like for example, a teacher who's trying to pay, like everybody needs help with a math problem, and you're trying to get around and help all of them, and because you can't get around to help all of them, you leave some people out, right? Finally, and most important here, uh, one of the major criticisms of groups was that which Federalist Number 10 attacked, where specifically you had James Madison saying, hey, a group, or what he called a faction, was a group of people who are adverse to the interests of society as a whole. Okay? And that, look, one little group wants to have influence over laws that govern the entire country, right? And that can be really frustrating because this group just cares about what they want and not what's best for the society as a whole. All right. Now, the last area here, where do groups have success? This is really important here. Groups are best at changing policies on small, narrow, non controversial issues. Okay. Groups don't usually sway people on the big deals or the big issues. Think of, and we'll use this as an example because it's so controversial, abortion. All right. If you have somebody who is a pro choice member of Congress, the odds are that there's no amount of data or you know, no argument that you could give them that will change their mind on being pro choice. And the same is true for somebody who's anti abortion. There's no way you can change their mind on it with argumentation. So, what you can do, however, is you can try to get them to make small changes. Talk to a pro choice person about a 48-hour mandatory waiting period so that a woman can decide if she really wants to have an abortion. And you try to chip away at somebody's viewpoint or perspective or make small changes, okay? Things that are not controversial, right? That's where groups have the most success, right? You're not going to get somebody to change a really controversial, hardened opinion. You're going to get them to change the small things, the little stuff. That's where groups have the most success, okay? And look, that's it for this chapter, y'all.